Joining our broadcast is journalist and blogger Roman Tsymbaliuk. Hi, Roman.
Hi there, Volodymyr.
So what do you think about Yanukovych's appearance today, the eternally legitimate one?
Actually, it's quite a remarkable story because we haven't seen him in a long time. And when I saw his face on Russian news outlets, my first reaction was, well, it must be artificial intelligence. After all, he hasn't been in the public eye for honestly many, many years. And why exactly did they compel him to record this rather brief, less than a minute long video? It was in fact in order to seamlessly continue Putin's significant speech delivered accordingly in China, where he explicitly stated that the president, who was vehemently against joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, commonly known as NATO, was allegedly overthrown as a direct result of a sudden and forceful coup d'etat, as President Putin himself precisely put it. Well, for our part, first of all, let us remind you that we've had different presidents, some who were against and some who were for. And even Yanukovych himself, if you dig through the archives, repeatedly stated that he supported Ukraine's accession to the alliance. And now he has turned into, well, a prisoner. Listen, he's simply a hostage of Putin. Those confused, bewildered eyes darting frantically around, meticulously reading the intricate text, well, this profound and utterly unexpected kind of downfall is probably something that the Donetsk guy in his wildest dreams could never have truly imagined for himself at all.
Ram, listen, let's do this so our viewers don't have to imagine it themselves. We can show the video and just watch closely, including how Yanukovych's eyes keep darting around.
But I was the one who oversaw and pushed forward the process of Ukraine joining the EU. But I was always a staunch and convinced opponent of Ukraine joining NATO. I always understood clearly and distinctly that this would be a disaster for Ukraine, a road to nowhere, a direct path to civil war.
Okay, a few points right away, speaking as a professional host. Yes, his eyes are darting around, so he's reading from a script, that's obvious. Second, Yanukovych never spoke like that. We all remember Yanukovych's public speeches. The man was inarticulate. He couldn't form proper sentences, right? In other words, it was hard for him to express his thoughts. But here it's just perfect. So it's been rehearsed, and not just once.
Obviously, after the 100th take, he managed to deliver two main points here. Vladimir Vladimirovich, meaning the Russian maniac Putin, is right. So in this way, he said, look, I don't just live in Sochi for no reason. I don't just raise a new child for no reason. I didn't just become a Russian citizen for nothing. And in fact, we've even started to forget who Yanukovych is and what he's associated with. Although, as history shows, there really was such a figure. And now this is the final story. What is this a path to? To civil war? Listen, even Russians have stopped using that phrase. And yet, when Crimea was seized and the Russian army was in Donbass in the form of the "they're not there" troops, they were pushing the thesis that we're not there. Well, we remember that perfectly well, and that you supposedly have this civil war going on. So when they wrote this text for Yanukovych now, it really does look, well, pretty dumb. For the reason that on February 24th, 2022, Putin stopped playing the "they're not there" game, stopped buying uniforms at any military surplus store and so on, when he began the full-scale invasion, which they call a special military operation, a vile war, not a special operation. So these musings, they're just like that. In general, I would look at this whole story from the perspective of a person's downfall, both moral and physical. After all, when the Yanukovych family and all those Sashas and Vityas who were still alive back then, they thought they basically ruled everything here. It turns out that when, as a result of their, idiotic policies, they lost power, what happened, for example, to their assets in the occupied part of Donbass, in Donetsk in particular? The Russians took everything. And this is just such a telling story when he really did concentrate, mind you, up to and including February 21st, 2014, the full extent of power. All these comrades like the Levochkins and many others, by the way, for some reason, all the security officials together with Yanukovych left for Russia after the revolution. I honestly don't even know why. I mean, they had everything. And then he turned into this absolute nothing. A pathetic laughingstock, really. Well, I think this should serve as an example for everyone, for all, of where political stupidity leads. And Viktor Yanukovych, I saw him many times at various press conferences when I worked in Moscow. He really never had any oratory skills. Well, that's obvious. Let's just note once again, he read that text from a piece of paper. So how long was that? 58 seconds. 58 seconds of Yanukovych. Well, yes, you could say he didn't stumble.
Yeah, he didn't break a single pen or pencil. Definitely not him. So it was all staged, all directed. Roma, if I understood you correctly, you think this is just a continuation of, or part of, Putin's visit to China. So is this supposed to reinforce the statements that came out of the mouth of the Russian dictator over there?
Well, of course, he said that Yanukovych was against NATO, and accordingly, that's why he lost power. Once again, let's ask ourselves a question from our side. First of all, to the presidents and leaders of the SCO countries, don't you find it strange, people who have achieved so much in the world, like in India, China, that in 2025, Putin is using arguments from 2014 as an explanation for why he's waging war? Well, if it's about NATO, then we have to ask, from 2014 to 2025, why didn't we join NATO? Honestly, this is some kind of panopticon, I would say Kremlin, Putin, idiocy and blood. In other words, the Russian maniac keeps going around and repeating this mantra about a coup d'etat on every platform. Although, once again, all the countries represented in the SCO have their own intelligence services, their own analytical centers. They all know perfectly well what happened and how. They know everything about Crimea. The only thing is, maybe they don't take such a principled stance because quite simply, they profit from Vladimir Putin's madness. I'm looking right now at some reports on the Moscow Times. And here they write, Putin gave India almost $13 billion through oil discounts. Well, of course, Modi always calls for peace at every meeting. But on the other hand, he and Xi Jinping probably think, well, Putin is just, how to put it, a fool, and not making money off him would be, well, probably stupid and pointless. So they profit from this. And yes, from time to time, they say that they're for peace. But what seems to me to be a very important point is this. They also adopted this declaration on international issues, the so-called Tianjin Declaration. And there isn't a single word about Ukraine in it. In my opinion, that's a positive development. What does that mean? It means that the nonsense coming from Vladimir Putin was categorically refused support by other countries, and they couldn't agree on a common position. So Ukraine isn't mentioned at all. That's precisely how it genuinely seems to me. And in an overarching sense, this particular SCO summit is, one might say, truly happening to a distinctly Chinese tune, reflecting its influence and direction. There are also some interesting statements from Xi Jinping, like China supporting the accession of Armenia and Azerbaijan to the SCO. All the Central Asian countries are part of this organization. I'm just saying that, in my considered opinion, all of this truly makes it abundantly clear that the Russian Federation is no longer the truly dominant and influential force in this particular and significant region of the world. And that's the new reality. Such a complete reset of Russian influence either has never happened before or hasn't happened in a very long time. And all of this is a consequence of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And all this talk from Putin about supposedly discussing some kind of peace agreements with Trump is complete nonsense, because Putin's minions, specifically his foreign affairs advisor, say that there were no agreements with Trump about trilateral negotiations. So the question is, what was Putin doing in Alaska besides trampling on sacred American soil? Obviously nothing. So essentially, in public rhetoric, if we go back to Putin again, they've been saying this for 11 years, saying it for 11 years and dropping aerial bombs. Well, who could this be intended for? Probably so. In this way, they send greetings to the Americans, the American peacekeepers.
Yes. Look, well, in that case, even Trump's statement that the trilateral meeting will take place, is that wishful thinking, right? Is this wishful thinking? Or is it blind optimism? No matter what, against all odds, we will definitely meet. Or are these the same kind of statements as those once made about the 24 hours? Well, yes, of course I said 24 hours, but I didn't specify exactly when those 24 hours should start. That was before he said it was all just a joke?
A joke? There are no jokes in international affairs. By the way, today is actually Donald Trump's deadline. 2 weeks have passed. Yes, since the meeting in Alaska. Nothing at all has changed during this time. And Trump looks, forgive me for being blunt, but he looks like a foreign policy idiot. And the American president will be criticized more and more harshly here. Accordingly, not all Americans in the United States agree with this kind of attitude toward their country. And as I suppose the upcoming and significant meeting in China will, in a very real sense, be a rather cold and sobering shower for the Americans, providing a moment of stark realization and perhaps a necessary jolt to their perspectives. So what does this mean? China is actively strengthening its global influence. That is to say, they are diligently building an entire international coalition around themselves, bringing in various countries that, let's say, are not traditionally in China's immediate orbit, but for diverse reasons are carefully balancing their allegiances between the West and accordingly China. And what about our American grandpa? He occasionally makes all sorts of silly remarks about the European Union. So if things keep going this way, the states will end up alone, and ultimately either Donald Trump himself or the people who come after him will make it their first priority to restore relations with the European Union. And honestly, I even think they'll find a way to compensate Europe for all the expenses on weapons that are currently being purchased for Ukraine. Because this entire and complex situation, well, it is so very much more complicated than simply saying, yo, this is President Biden's war. It is absolutely not my war. And Biden spent $300 billion. Of course, Biden could have spent fewer billions if he had allocated the first 50 to those weapon systems that were needed to achieve political and military objectives back in 2022. Of course, you can criticize Biden here, but Biden is no longer president. And accordingly, this entire and comprehensive setup is so incredibly intriguing and captivating, especially while the current American president consistently keeps facing one significant foreign policy failure after another, leading to considerable international challenges and domestic concerns. In particular, I noticed that Americans are really bothered by this massive and very rapid rapprochement between India and China, which just a short while ago seemed absolutely impossible. But remarkably, President Trump did an absolutely great job. He even managed to significantly speed this entire process up. Instead of striking directly at Russia, they ultimately ended up hitting their very own, well, in fact, their former allies, those who had once stood by them. And everyone reacted to this the way they did. Although, to settle the question of whether America is great or not, it would be enough to give Ukraine unlimited bombs and missiles. And just announce in the press that Ukraine will have all long-range strike capabilities in unlimited quantities. Then, of course, that's when people would really start paying attention to the American government. But as it is, so what? For 2 weeks, 3 weeks, everyone just laughs at Donald. But I think the American president will be forced to change his approach somehow. Again, the Western world sees all of this too, and everyone is working either with the United States or without them. But what can you do? We still have to do what we need to do.
Well, yes, it really does feel like Europe now understands the situation with the Russian Federation much better, or at least defines the intentions of the Russian Federation better than the current leadership of the United States of America. Again, that's just a feeling. It doesn't mean it's the absolute truth. And it also seems that in Russia they understand this perfectly well too, that Europe sees all of this and definitely won't ignore it. And apparently they're starting to act, and to act using their own methods. And their methods are murder, robbery, rape, and so on. When it comes to European leaders, you probably can't rob or rape them, but they could definitely try to kill them. Where am I going with this? Today, there was an incident in the skies over Bulgaria involving a plane that, at the time, was carrying the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The thing is, she was flying to Bulgaria for a meeting to discuss important issues. And then, for some reason, the GPS started malfunctioning. It completely failed. The pilots were forced to land using paper maps. They managed to do it. Everything turned out fine. Nevertheless, the main theory currently being considered is that it was an act of external interference. And the first on the list of suspects are the Russians. Do you think this theory holds water?
Listen, if they are officially jamming GPS signals in all the Baltic countries at some airfields in Poland, I mean, they are officially declaring at the highest level that Europe is an enemy of the Russian Federation. So what's so surprising about that? What do you mean? Pretending that this damned uncertainty exists. Well, let's not play that game. After all, we don't have the image of Donald Trump, who can afford to muse about how the kids in the sandbox had a fight and he needs to somehow separate them, but it's not really working out and so on. There's something interesting about Donald too. Right now, Russians are courting him, saying he's such a great guy, he's for peace. But why? So that accordingly there won't be any actions from the US side, particularly regarding sanctions and so on. But when it comes to Europeans, they're taking action. Well, yeah, if Ursula's plane had crashed, there would have been a celebration in Russia. They consistently call her very nasty, truly offensive names. Ursula, for instance, and they make incredibly aggressive statements like, "We'll absolutely destroy you all," directed at Europeans. Well, the last time such a shocking declaration was made, it was broadcast on Russian state television, and that is a direct, verifiable quote. I personally heard it just last night. So, considering that Russian state television is on a leash from the Kremlin, well, these guys, they're pretty straightforward. That's also a truly fascinating and quite interesting aspect of today's situation. They are absolutely and completely open, transparent, and genuinely hide nothing at all from anyone.
Yeah, that's true. Roma, thank you for your analysis. Thank you for the information you provided. See you again on air. I think there will be plenty of topics to discuss in the near future. Roman Tsymbaliuk, journalist and blogger, joined our broadcast. Thank you, Roma.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.